2 hours before the vows. The weight of a life reclaimed. If you had asked me years ago when my hands were still calloused from scrubbing floors in diners just to afford textbooks, when my name was whispered like a mistake in halls where I didn't belong, if you had asked me then where I'd be today, I would have laughed. Not the kind that dances in your throat, light and carefree, but the kind that claws its way out, bitter and disbelieving. Because back then, respect wasn't something given to girls like me. It was something you stole, piece by piece, with every late night study session, every job application slipped under doors that wanted to stay shut. Every time I stood taller than the voices that hissed, I wasn't enough. And now I'm 2 hours away from walking down an aisle lined with roses and promises, my fingers trembling not from fear, but from the sheer, electric rightness of it all. That the air in this room, my room, the one I'll leave behind after today, hums with a kind of magic I never dared to imagine. My wedding dress hangs like a ghost of the future I fought for, ivory silk catching the afternoon light, whispering against the doorframe each time the breeze dares to sneak in. I trace the lace at the sleeves, the same hands that once gripped mops now adorned with rings that spark like tiny rebellions. Look how far we've come, they seem to say, and God have we. Every scar, every sleepless night, every time I swallowed my pride just to take one step forward, it all led here. To this moment where the weight of my past doesn't drag me down anymore. It lifts me that outside. The world is a blur of laughter and clinking glasses. My bridesmaids, my sisters in every way that matters, are downstairs, their voices weaving through the house like a soundtrack to this dream. But up here, it's just me and the quiet. The kind of quiet that lets you hear your own heartbeat, steady and strong, a drumline to the life you're about to claim. I catch my reflection in the mirror, and for once, I don't flinch. The girl staring back isn't the one who used to apologize for existing. She's the woman who carved her name into a world that tried to erase her. And today she wins. I can already see it. The way his face will light up when I walk toward him, the way our hands will find each other like they've been magnetized by fate. After everything, after the battles no one saw, and the tears I cried in silence, I am choosing this, choosing joy, choosing love. Choosing to believe against all odds that I deserve a happiness this bright dot. But then, my phone buzzes. His name flashes on the screen, and something in my chest tightens because I know his voice, the way it cracks when he's trying to hold himself together. And when I answer, the first words he chokes out aren't the ones I expected. Naomi, my mom wants to see you alone for one last talk. The room tilts, just for a second, because this is the old script trying to rewrite my ending. The doubt creeping in, the familiar sting of not good enough. But then I straighten my spine, and I remember I am not that girl anymore. And whatever comes next, I'll meet it the same way I've met every other storm, with my head high, my heart fiercer, and the unshakable knowledge that my worth was never theirs to decide. So here's what I need you to understand. As we stand together at the edge of this story, the moments that try to break us are also the ones that reveal what we're made of. And today, I choose to be unbreakable. Now, let's see what she has to say. The phone buzzed against the vanity like a warning I wasn't prepared to hear. My hands, still trembling from the last touch of my bridal makeup, froze mid-motion as his name flashed across the screen. Daniel, just seeing it should have filled me with warmth, but the way my stomach twisted told me something was wrong. I answered, and the first sound that hit me wasn't his voice. It was the ragged edge of his breath, like he'd been running or maybe crying. Naomi. My name cracked under the weight of whatever he was carrying, and suddenly the room felt too small, the air too thick. I gripped the edge of the counter, my knuckles whitening under the pressure. What's happening? I asked, but my voice didn't sound like my own. It was too thin, too young, like the girl I'd fought so hard to leave behind. His next words landed like a stone in my chest. It's my mom, She wants to see you. Alone, before the wedding. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was alive with everything he wasn't saying. I could hear the guilt in the way his breath hitched, the fear in the pause that stretched too long between us. Now, the word tasted bitter. 2 hours. That's all the time I had left before I was supposed to walk down that aisle, before I became his wife in front of everyone we loved. And now his mother, the woman who had spent 2 years watching me like a hawk, measuring my worth in sideways glances and polite but poisoned compliments, wanted me to herself for one last talk. My reflection in the mirror blurred as my vision burned. I'd spent my whole life proving I wasn't what people assumed. A girl from the wrong side of town, a woman who didn't belong in their polished world. I'd clawed my way into respect, into love, into this moment. And now, with the scent of my bouquet still fresh in the air and the echo of laughter from my bridesmaids just outside the door, I was being summoned like a child called to the principal's office. The worst part? The way Daniel's voice shook when he whispered, "Please, Naomi, just hear her out." Like he already knew. Like he'd known all along. That betrayal is a quiet thing. It doesn't scream, it slithers. It wraps around your ribs and squeezes just enough to steal your breath, to make you question every step you've ever taken. Was this why she never truly welcomed me? Was this why her smiles never reached her eyes? My mind raced through every dinner, every holiday, every carefully curated moment where I'd played the part of the gracious future daughter-in-law, all while she sat there, sipping her wine, waiting for the right moment to strike. And now, with the clock ticking down to forever, she'd chosen her battlefield. The irony? She thought she was the one with the power. She had no idea what I'd survived to get here. I set the phone down slowly, my fingers numb. The room spun, not with fear, but with something sharper. Something like clarity. Because here's the truth, no one tells you about moments like this. They don't break you, they reveal you. And as I stood there, in my dress, with my heart pounding like a war drum, I knew exactly who I was. I wasn't the girl who'd flinch at her words. I wasn't the woman who'd let her rewrite my story. I was Naomi, the same woman who turned every no into a watch me, every closed door into a lesson in how to build my own. So yes, I'd go. I'd walk into that room with my head high and my spine still. Not because she deserved it, but because I did that. And when I left, she'd finally see what he'd seen in me all along. The weight of a crown no one can see. The mirror reflected a woman poised between two worlds. One where she was the radiant bride, and another where she was still the girl who'd spent a lifetime proving she belonged. My hand steadied as I traced the final sweep of eyeliner, the dark line sharp as the resolve hardening inside me. 2 hours. That's all that stood between me and the vows I dreamed of. But first, Raren, Eleanor, a name that carried the weight of generational judgment, of whispered doubts about whether a woman like me, self-made, unpedigreed, could ever truly wear the title of daughter-in-law without tarnishing it. I chose the pearl earrings deliberately, not for their elegance, but because they'd been my grandmother's. The same woman who'd scrubbed floors to send me to college, who'd hissed in my ear when the scholarship kid sneered, "Hold your head higher than their pity, Nikita." The clasp clicked shut, and I felt her there in the tremor of my fingers. This was the armor I'd been forging my whole life. The ability to walk into a room where I wasn't wanted and leave with my dignity intact. But today the stakes weren't just my pride. Today the collateral was my future. The scent of gardenias, my wedding bouquet already arranged on the vanity, mingled with the metallic tang of adrenaline. I inhaled deeply, letting the contradiction settle in my lungs. How poetic, I thought, that the same hands now smoothing my hair had once been calloused from waitressing double shifts, had clenched into fists when a professor implied I'd slept my way into an internship. Class isn't just about money, it's about the way people look at you when they think you don't notice. The way Eleanor's eyes had flicked to my thrift store dress at our first meeting, her smile never quite reaching the cold calculation behind it. Such an unexpected match, she'd purred. I'd laughed then, because what else could I do? But I'd filed the moment away, like I did all the others. The sideways glances at my accent, the innocent questions about my family's background. The knock at the door made me jump. Naomi, the car's here. My sister's voice was gentle, but I heard the fear beneath it. She knew, like I did, that this wasn't just a talk. It was a trial, one I'd been preparing for long before the invitation arrived. I stood, the silk of my robe whispering against my skin like a secret. For a second, I let myself imagine walking away, letting Daniel's mother keep her illusions, her hierarchy of worth. But then I saw my reflection again, and I remembered I wasn't that girl anymore, the one who flinched, the one who apologized for existing. The diamond on my finger caught the light, a fragment of fire. She thinks she's calling me to surrender. I thought, she has no idea I was born for war. The door closed behind me with a finality that echoed like a promise. 2 hours until my wedding. One conversation to rewrite every assumption they'd ever made about me. And as the car pulled away, I let myself smile, not the polite, practiced one I'd perfected for polite company, but the real one, the one that said, "Watch me." The moment my heels touched the cobblestone path leading to the Magnolia House, that grand, suffocating estate wrapped in ivy and old money, I felt the weight of every judgment ever cast upon me pressing down like the humid afternoon air. This wasn't just a meeting, it was a trial. And the jury, a woman who had spent 2 years measuring my worth in whispered comments about my lack of pedigree, my too loud laugh, the way I dared to love her son without an inheritance to my name. The wrought iron gate groaned as I pushed it open, the sound like a warning. Inside, the garden was a symphony of controlled beauty. Roses pruned to perfection, hedges sculpted into submission. Even the fountain's water obeying some unseen rule of decorum. My fingers twitched at my sides. I had spent hours preparing for this. My dress, a structured navy sheath that screamed professional. Because, God forbid, I look like I just stepped out of a catalog. My mother-in-law would actually approve of. My hair twisted into a chignon, so tight it pulled up my temples. But no amount of armor could shield me from the truth. I'd learned long ago to people like her, I would always be the girl from the wrong side of the tracks. No matter how many degrees I earned or how flawlessly I could navigate a 5-course dinner. The front door loomed, its mahogany surface polished to a mere sheen. I caught my reflection in it, wide eyes, lips pressed into a line my grandmother would have called stubborn. Good, I thought. Let her see it. Let her see the woman who had clawed her way through scholarships and side jobs, who had built a life on grit while others coasted on last names. But beneath the defiance, my pulse hammered a traitorous rhythm. What if she's right? The voice slithered in, the one that had hissed at me in every boardroom, every PTA meeting, every time I dared to speak up. What if you're not enough for him, for them? I knocked before I could unravel further.
the echo of it swallowed by the cavernous foyer. Then footsteps.
Not the hurried clip of a maid, but the deliberate, measured stride of a woman who owned every inch of the space she occupied. The door swung open, and there she stood, impeccable in pearls and a cashmere twin set, her smile as practiced as her garden's symmetry. "Naomi," she said. "My name a polite blade. You came." The scent of lilacs and old books spilled out around her, thick with the weight of generations I didn't belong to. I stepped inside, my spine a steel rod, my smile just sharp enough to cut. The battlefield was set, and for the first time I wasn't here to beg for scraps of respect. I was here to take what was mine. Tell me, have you ever stood in a room where the very air seemed to whisper you don't belong? Where every polished surface reflected back the parts of you they'd rather ignore? That's where I was. But here's what they never tell you about those moments. The fire they light inside you isn't just anger, it's clarity. And clarity, that's the first step to burning the whole damn system down. So stay with me. The best part is coming. The door closed behind me with a soft final click, the kind of sound that seals you into a moment you can't escape. The air in that sunlit parlor was thick with the scent of aged mahogany and something else, something sharper, like the metallic tang of a blade sheathed in silk. Eleanor sat across from me in a high-backed chair, her posture so perfectly upright it was as if she'd been poured into it. Not settled, her fingers adorned with rings that had probably cost more than my first car, tapped once against the porcelain teacup. Tap tap, a rhythm that wasn't nervous, but calculating. She didn't look at me when she spoke first. Instead, her gaze lingered on the steam curling from her Earl Grey, her voice a polished blade wrapped in honey. "Naomi, dear, how unexpected that you'd come alone." Not a question, a statement. One that carried the weight of every unspoken judgment she'd ever hurled my way, through side-eyed glances at family dinners, through the way she'd accidentally mispronounced my last name for years. I smoothed my hands over my knees, feeling the fabric of my dress, chosen carefully, ironed twice, suddenly inadequate under her scrutiny. She wanted me to fidget. She wanted me to apologize for existing in her son's world. But I'd spent too many years watching my mother's calloused hands scrub floors for people like her to flinch now.
So I met her gaze, steady, and let my silence hang between us like a challenge. That's when her lips curved, just slightly, into something that wasn't quite a smile. "You've always been so resilient, haven't you?" Resilient. A word that sounded like praise but tasted like pee. Like she'd read my life story in a charity brochure and found it quaint. I knew what she saw, the girl who'd worked 2 jobs to put herself through community college, the one who'd shown up to their Christmas Eve in a thrifted coat, the fiancé who didn't know which fork to use first. But what she didn't see was the fire. Those things had lit in me, the same fire that had me sitting here, chin lifted, while her son had begged me not to come. Her next words were slower, deliberate, as if she were unfolding a map to a place she knew I'd never been. "I suppose that's what love does, doesn't it? Makes us overlook discrepancies." Discrepancies. There it was, the word that sliced through the polite veneer, the one that meant you don't belong here. I could have laughed, because she thought this was about her money, her name, her legacy, but she'd misunderstood the game entirely. This wasn't about proving I was enough for her son. This was about proving to myself that I'd never again let someone's disdain dictate my worth. So I leaned forward, just an inch, and let my voice cut through the tension like a knife. "Eleanor, if we're speaking honestly, let's really speak honestly." The teacup paused halfway to her lips, and for the first time I saw it, the flicker of unease in her eyes. She'd expected a girl who'd bow. Instead, she'd gotten a woman who'd already decided, "I will not break that." You quote, "the been there, haven't you?" That moment when the world expects you to shrink, but something inside you, something hard-won, refuses. That's where power lives. Not in the absence of fear, but in the choice to stand anyway. So tell me, what's your moment? The one where you looked prejudice in the eye and said, "Not today," because that's where legacies begin. Not in the quiet compliance, but in the roar of the woman who decides she's done being silent. The moment the ground shattered beneath me. There are moments in life when the air itself seems to thicken, when every breath feels like swallowing broken glass. That's exactly how it was when she leaned forward, her perfectly manicured fingers pressing into the mahogany table between us, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "Naomi, there's something you need to know about my son, something he's never had the courage to tell you." My stomach twisted. I'd spent years learning to read the silence before the storm, the way my father's voice would go eerily calm right before his fists did the talking. But this was different. This was the kind of quiet that precedes an explosion. Her lips curled, not quite a smile, not quite a sneer, as she delivered the words like a blade to the ribs. "He never loved you, not really. You were just convenient." A pretty distraction while he waited for the woman his family actually approved of. The room tilted. My fingers dug into the arms of the chair, nails biting into the fabric hard enough to leave crescents of pain. Convenient. That word echoed, bouncing off the walls of every memory I'd ever had with him. The late night conversations, the way he traced my scars like they were constellations, the promises whispered against my skin. A distraction. Rage burned up my throat, hot and acidic. But beneath it something worse, the cold, familiar ache, of course. Because hadn't I always been someone's almost? The scholarship girl in a room full of legacies. The foster kid who learned to laugh too loud just so people wouldn't notice how little she belonged. My mother-in-law's eyes gleamed with triumph as she watched the realization dawn on me. She'd won. She'd known exactly where to strike. And for a heartbeat, I was 12 again, standing in a welfare office while a social worker clucked her tongue and said, "You're just not what we're looking for, dear." But then something shifted. The fire in my chest didn't fade, it focused. Because here's the thing about being the girl who's always had to fight for her place at the table. You learn the weight of your own voice. And in that moment, I remembered every time I'd been told I wasn't enough, and every time I'd proven them wrong. My hands stopped shaking. I met her gaze, unblinking, and let the silence stretch between us like a drawn sword. She expected tears. She expected me to crumble. What she didn't expect, the slow, deliberate smile that curved my lips as I leaned in closer, my voice steady as a vow. "You think this changes anything?" The words hung there, heavy with promise. "Because some secrets are meant to destroy you, and some, they're just the kindling for the fire you've been waiting to light. So tell me, when the world hands you a match, do you let it burn you? Or do you become the flame?" The moment her words hung in the air like a blade suspended above my heart, something inside me shifted, not shattered, but hardened. My fingers trembled against the delicate lace of my wedding dress, the fabric suddenly feeling like armor rather than silk. She had expected tears. She had wanted them. But what she got was the slow, deliberate rise of my chin, my gaze locking onto hers with a clarity that surprised even me. "You thought this would break me," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. The words tasted like iron, like the resolve I'd spent years forging in the fires of being told I wasn't enough. By professors who doubted my intellect, by ex-lovers who mistook my kindness for weakness, by a world that had always demanded I shrink to fit its narrow expectations. But here's what you don't understand. I've been broken before, and every single time, I didn't just pick up the pieces. I rebuilt them stronger. My hands stopped shaking. I smoothed the skirt of my dress, not out of nerves, but because I needed to feel the weight of this moment. This wasn't just about her cruel revelation. It was about every battle I'd fought to stand here, in this room, on the brink of a future I had earned. She scoffed. crossing her arms as if my calm were an insult. You're delusional. You think love is enough. You think you are enough. Her voice was sharp, but I heard the fear beneath it. The fear of a woman who had spent her life measuring worth by bank accounts and bloodlines, and now faced someone who refused to be measured at all. I stepped closer, close enough to see the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. I don't need you to believe I'm enough, I whispered, my voice trembling now, not with doubt, but with the raw power of a truth I'd only just fully grasped, because I know it, and that's the one thing no secret, no lie, no last-minute talk can ever take from me. The air between us crackled, charged with the electricity of a power shift. She had come here to strip me bare, but instead she had handed me the very thing she tried to steal. My voice thought, and oh how I used it. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The quiet certainty in my words was louder than any shout. You wanted to see who I really am. Fine. Look at me. I spread my arms slightly, the sleeves of my dress catching the light like wings. I'm the girl who worked 3 jobs to put herself through school while you were telling your son she wasn't the right kind. I'm the woman who loved him anyway. Not despite your judgment, but because I knew his heart was bigger than the box you tried to keep it in. And I'm the bride who's about to walk down that aisle with or without your blessing, because my worth isn't a question you get to answer. Her face paled. She hadn't expected this, the raw, unfiltered strength of a woman who'd spent a lifetime turning wounds into wisdom. And in that moment, I realized something that would change me forever. Humiliation isn't something others do to you. It's what you let them convince you you deserve. But I deserved more. We all do. So here's what I need you to hear. Really hear the next time someone tries to shrink you, to drown your light in their shadows. Ask yourself, what if their words aren't weapons but tests? Tests of how unshakable your truth is. Tests of how fiercely you'll fight for the life you've built. Because dignity isn't the absence of conflict. It's the courage to meet it head on and say, I am still here, and I am not afraid of you. Now tell me, when was the last time you chose your dignity over silence? The air between us was thick enough to choke on. Every breath I took felt like swallowing glass. There she stood, my soon-to-be mother-in-law, her lips curled into that familiar smirk, the one that had dismissed me 100 times before. But this time, the weight of her words wasn't just condescension. It was a blade aimed at the heart of everything I'd fought to build. You really think you belong here, Naomi, in this family, with my son? Her voice dripped with the kind of disdain that only comes from someone who spent a lifetime believing they're untouchable. And then she said it, the secret she'd been hoarding like a weapon, the one she thought would break me. He only proposed because he pitied you. That's why he never told you about the trust fund, the house in the Hamptons, the life you'll never truly be part of. For a second, the world tilted. My fingers trembled, not from fear, but from the sheer force of holding back the storm inside me. I had spent years being told I wasn't enough, by foster parents who saw me as a paycheck, by bosses who called me ambitious, like it was an insult, by a society that measures worth in bank accounts and last names.
But in that moment, standing in her perfectly decorated sitting room, surrounded by the cold elegance of her judgment, I realized something. She wasn't just attacking me. She was attacking the girl who had clawed her way out of nothing, the woman who had learned to turn scars into armor. And I refused to let her win that. My voice cut through the silence like a whip. You're right, I said, and her eyes flickered with triumph until I continued. I don't belong in a world where love is a transaction, where respect is earned by birthright instead of character. But here's what you'll never understand. Your son didn't choose me out of pity. He chose me because I'm the only one who ever saw him, not just his last name or his trust fund. And if that terrifies you, good. I stepped closer, close enough to see the first crack in her composure. Because I'm not here to beg for a place at your table. I'm here to build my own. And if you can't respect that, then this conversation and this wedding ends now. The room seemed to hold its breath. For the first time, the power wasn't hers. It was mine, not because I had screamed or begged, but because I had chosen me. And in that choice, something inside me shifted forever. This wasn't just about standing up to her. It was about standing up for every version of myself I'd ever been told to hide. The air in that room, once thick with tension, now hung heavy with a different kind of weight. The kind that presses down only to lift you higher when you finally dare to breathe. I stood there, my fingers still trembling slightly from the force of my own words, the echoes of my voice lingering like the last notes of a song I never knew I could sing. She had come at me with daggers wrapped in silk, expecting me to flinch, to shrink, to prove every cruel assumption she'd ever made about me. But something extraordinary happened when I looked her in the eye and said, "Not today, not ever again." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was alive, crackling with the energy of a truth too long suppressed. My truth, I could feel it settling into my bones, warm and unshakable. For the first time, I wasn't waiting for permission to exist as I was. I wasn't bracing for the next cutting remark or sideways glance. I was simply there, whole, unapologetic, and free in a way I'd never allowed myself to be before.
It was as if every battle I'd ever fought, the late nights studying to prove I belonged, the sideways comments about my background, the quiet moments of doubting my own worth, had all led to this, not to her approval, not to her understanding, but to mine. I remember walking out of that room, my heels clicking against the floor, like a metronome, counting down to the rest of my life. Each step felt lighter, as if the weight of her judgments, of everyone's judgments, had dissolved into the air. And then it hit me. This wasn't just about standing up to her. It was about standing up for myself, for the girl who'd been told she was too loud, too ambitious, too much. For the woman who'd spent years molding herself into shapes that never quite fit. In that moment, I realized something profound. Dignity isn't something you're given, it's something you claim. And I had just carved mine out of the wreckage of her expectations. Now, I want you to sit with this for a second. Close your eyes and ask yourself, where in your life have you been waiting for someone else's permission to take up space? Where have you dimmed your light because it made others uncomfortable? Because here's the truth, they don't want you to know. The moment you decide that your worth isn't up for debate, the world has no choice but to adjust. It won't be easy. There will be people who bristle, who push back, who try to pull you into old patterns of doubt. But when you stand firm, when you choose you over their comfort, something magical happens. You don't just change their perception of you, you change your own. So let this be your reminder. The next time you're faced with a moment that demands you shrink, remember the power of a single, unyielding no. Remember that your story isn't theirs to write. And when the dust settles, when the silence comes, listen closely, because that's the sound of your own voice, finally free. The air in the bridal suite was thick with the scent of gardenias, my favorite mingling with the faintest hint of champagne, still lingering on my lips, from the toast I'd shared with my bridesmaids earlier. But now, as I stood before the full-length mirror, it wasn't the delicate lace of my gown, or the way the sunlight caught the pearls in my hair, that held my attention. It was the woman staring back at me. Her shoulders were straighter, her chin lifted just a little higher than it had been 2 hours before. The weight of that confrontation with my soon-to-be mother-in-law no longer pressed down on me like a storm cloud. Instead, it had settled into something else, something fiercer, brighter, a quiet fire. Outside, the laughter of guests filtered through the cracked window, the hum of anticipation, electric in the warm afternoon air. Somewhere beyond these walls, my fiancé was waiting, his nerves tangled with excitement, unaware of the battle I'd just fought or that I'd won. The violinists had begun their prelude, the notes drifting up like a promise, and I let myself breathe it in. This was the sound of my future unfolding, unshaken by the past. My hands, steady now, smoothed the silk of my skirt one last time. No tremors, no doubt, just the unmistakable pulse of my own heartbeat, strong and sure, reminding me, you chose this, you chose you. I turned to my bridesmaids, their faces alight with a mix of awe and admiration they didn't bother to hide. I'm ready, I said, and the words tasted like victory. They weren't just about the ceremony anymore. They were about every moment that had led here. The late nights spent proving my worth in boardrooms, the tears I'd refused to let fall in front of people who thought they could diminish me, the quiet vow I'd made to myself long ago that I would never again let someone else write the story of my life. That vow had been tested today, bent but never broken. And now, as the music swelled and the doors to the chapel creaked open, I realized something profound. The greatest power I'd ever wield wasn't in the love I was about to celebrate, but in the dignity I'd refused to surrender. So when my father offered his arm, I took it, but I didn't lean on him. I walked tall, my gaze fixed on the aisle ahead, where hundreds of eyes would soon be on me, not because of the drama that had unfolded in private, but because of the grace with which I carried myself through it. Let them whisper, let them wonder. I knew the truth now. My worth wasn't up for debate, and as the first notes of the processional filled the air, I smiled, not just for the man waiting at the altar, but for the girl I'd been, who'd never dared to believe she'd stand this tall. This was her moment too. And if you're listening to this, if you've ever felt the sting of being underestimated or the ache of having to fight for your place at the table, let me tell you something. Your moment is coming.
It's in the way you hold your head high after the storm, in the choices you make when no one's watching, in the legacy you build long after the doubters have faded into the background. So stand a little taller, speak a little louder. And when they ask how you did it, tell them you remembered you were never just surviving. You were preparing for this, for you. Now go. The world is waiting. The mirror doesn't lie anymore. There's a quiet before the storm of joy, and I'm standing in it alone, in a room bathed in golden light, my fingers trembling just slightly as they trace the lace of my gown. 2 hours. That's all the time it took for the woman I fought my whole life to become to be tested, one last time. And yet here I stand. Not broken, not bent, but brighter, for it. I look at myself in the mirror, and for the first time I don't see the girl who was told she wasn't enough, not by her blood, not by the world, and certainly not by the woman who just tried to shrink me into silence. I see the woman who looked jealousy in the eye and said, "You will not steal this from me." The woman who took every whispered doubt, every sideways glance, every "you don't belong here" and wove them into the very fabric of this dress. An armor of dignity, stitched with threads of my own making. I can still hear her voice, sharp as the blade she tried to slip between my ribs. "Do you really think you're what he deserves?" Oh, but she didn't realize. Her words weren't a weapon, they were a mirror. And in that moment I saw myself clearly, not through her bitterness, but through the fire of every battle I fought to stand here. The late nights studying while others slept, the jobs I worked to prove I could build my own worth, the tears I shed in private so I could laugh in public. She thought she was exposing a fraud. Instead, she handed me the final piece of my crown. The weight of this moment isn't just in the vows I'm about to say, it's in the ones I've already made, to myself, to the girl who used to flinch at her own reflection,
I promised her that one day she'd walk into a room and never apologize for the space she takes. That one day her joy wouldn't be a negotiation. That one day she'd stand at the altar, not as someone's compromise, but as their choice, bold, unshaken, and utterly certain of her right to be there. And now the music swells beyond the door, a symphony of what's mine, the laughter of friends who chose me, the love of a man who sees me. The life I built, not in spite of the storms, but because I learned to dance in them that, so when I step forward, it won't be as the woman they expected me to be. It'll be as the woman I became, the one who turned their doubt into her foundation, their scorn into her strength, and this aisle into a runway for the legacy she's just beginning to write. And you who've ever been told you're too much or not enough, let this be your permission slip. The world will always have its whispers, but your life, that's your microphone. Speak. The moment the chapel doors swung open, I didn't just step into a ceremony, I stepped into the life I had fought for. The air was thick with the scent of gardenias and candle wax, their fragrance wrapping around me like an embrace. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass, painting the aisle in jewel-toned hues that shimmered against my dress. Each step I took a quiet declaration. I am here. I belong here. My heart pounded, but not from fear, from the sheer weight of knowing this was the culmination of every battle I'd ever waged for my worth. The guests rose as one, their faces a blur of smiles and tears, but my eyes found only his. Daniel stood at the altar, his gaze locked onto mine with a tenderness that made my breath catch. His mother sat in the front row, her posture rigid, her expression unreadable. For a second, the memory of her words earlier that day flickered like a shadow. You'll never be enough for him. But then the violinist began to play, and the melody swallowed that doubt whole. The music wasn't just sound. It was a heartbeat, steady and sure, reminding me that I had already won. When Daniel took my hands, his fingers trembled against mine, not from nerves, but from the depth of what we were building together. The officiant's voice filled the space, but I barely heard the words. I was too busy memorizing the way Daniel's thumb traced circles on my palm, the way his voice cracked when he promised to stand beside me, not just in joy, but in every storm. And when it was my turn, I didn't just speak my vows, I claimed them. I choose you, I said, but I choose me too. The words hung in the air, a sacred pact with myself, as much as with him. The ring slid onto my finger, cool and heavy with promise. As we sealed our vows with a kiss, the chapel erupted, applause, laughter, the kind of joy that only comes when love defies the odds. But in that moment, I wasn't thinking about the guests, or the decorations, or even the future.
I was thinking about the girl I'd been, the one who'd been told she didn't deserve a seat at the table. She was standing here now, in a room full of witnesses, wearing her dignity like a crown. This wasn't just a wedding, it was a coronation. And if you've ever been made to feel small, if you've ever had to fight for your place in the world, let this be your reminder. The most powerful thing you can ever do is show up for yourself. Now go. Build a life so bold, so unapologetically yours, that no one dares question where you belong. As I stood there, my fingers trembling just slightly against his, as we whispered our vows, I could feel the weight of every unspoken word hanging in the air like the scent of the gardenias, wrapped around my bouquet. The ceremony was a symphony of love, soft laughter, the rustle of silk, the way the golden light spilled through the stained glass windows, but beneath it all there was her, my mother-in-law. I didn't need to look at her to know she was watching me, her gaze sharp as a blade she'd tried to wield just hours before, and yet something had shifted. The power wasn't hers anymore. I could feel it the way her breath hitched, when I spoke my vows with a voice that didn't waver, the way her fingers tightened around her husband's arm, when I looked into my fiancé's eyes and promised not just to love him, but to honor myself in that love. She had expected me to shrink, to stumble, to let her words from earlier carve grooves of doubt into my confidence. But instead I stood taller. Because the truth was never hers to control. Dot. And then there it was, the flicker in her expression. A shadow of something like realization, maybe even respect, crossing her face as the ring slid onto my finger. She had thought she knew who I was, the girl from the wrong side of the tracks, the one who didn't belong in their polished world. But in that moment, as the minister pronounced us husband and wife and my fiancé, my husband kissed me like I was the only woman in the world. She saw what everyone else did, a woman who had turned her scars into armor, a woman who had taken the very thing meant to break her and made it the foundation of her strength. I want you to sit with this for a second. Think about the last time someone tried to diminish you, told you weren't enough, made you feel small. Now ask yourself, what if the power was never theirs to begin with? What if the narrative they tried to force on you was just a house of cards waiting for you, your voice, your choices, your unshakable dignity to blow it all down? This isn't just my story, it's yours too. Every time you stand firm in who you are, every time you choose your worth over someone else's opinion, you're writing a legacy. And legacies, they don't beg for permission, they demand to be witnessed. So tell me, what's the first chapter of yours going to say? As the reception doors swung open, the air itself seemed to shimmer with something deeper than joy. It was the kind of happiness that only comes when you've stared down your deepest fears and refused to let them define you. There I stood, in a dress that now felt lighter than the weight of the secrets I carried for years, watching the faces of everyone who had witnessed my journey, some from the beginning, others only in these final transformative hours. The music swelled, but what I heard most clearly was the silence of the old narratives shattering. My mother-in-law sat at her table, her posture stiff at first, but her eyes, oh, her eyes betrayed the cracks in the armor she'd worn for decades. She didn't approach me, not yet, but she didn't look away either, and that was enough. Dot. The toasts began, and with each clink of a glass, I felt the ripple of something shifting in the room. My best friend raised hers first, her voice trembling as she recounted the night I'd called her, sobbing after that first humiliating dinner with his family. She told me then, she said, that she wouldn't just endure this life, she would own it. Laughter erupted, but it was the kind that carries tears in its wake. Then his brother stood, the one who'd always been a silent ally, and admitted how wrong he'd been to underestimate me. Naomi didn't just earn a place at this table, he said, gesturing to the head seat where I sat beside my husband. She redefined what it means to belong here. The applause wasn't polite, it was fervent, because they weren't just celebrating a marriage, they were honoring a rebellion. And then, it was my turn. I didn't stand on a chair or raise my voice. I didn't need to. The room leaned in as I spoke, my words weaving through the tables like a current. We all have moments where the world tries to tell us who we are, I said, my fingers tracing the stem of my glass.
Maybe it's a parent who sees your dreams as threats, or a partner who mistakes your strength for stubbornness, or a society that measures your worth by what you lack instead of what you've overcome. But here's the truth. Legacies aren't built on silence. They're built in the seconds when you choose to speak anyway. I looked at my mother-in-law then, not with defiance, but with something softer, acknowledgement. Thank you, I said, for reminding me that even the hardest lessons can carve space for the most unexpected grace. As the dance floor filled, I watched strangers pull each other into spins, their laughter loose and unguarded. A young woman, maybe 20, with the same wary eyes I'd once had, approached me hesitantly. How did you know, she whispered, that you were enough? I took her hands, my rings catching the light. I didn't, I admitted. I just decided I'd rather fail on my own terms than succeed on someone else's. Her grip tightened. She didn't say another word, but I saw it, the flicker of recognition, the first spark of her own fire. So here's my question to you, the one I'm asking as the music fades and the stars blur above us. What's the story you've been too afraid to rewrite? The one where you're the underdog, the outsider, the person they never saw coming. Because the world will always have its opinions, its hierarchies, its cruel little tests. But your life, that's not a test. It's your masterpiece, and masterpieces aren't created by waiting for permission. They're created by the ones brave enough to pick up the brush anyway, even when their hands are shaking, even when the canvas is already stained with someone else's doubts. Especially then. So dance, speak, take up space, not because you've proven anything to them, but because you've finally proven it to yourself. The legacy you leave isn't in the absence of scars, it's in the way you turn them into light. And honey, you are glowing. Now go build something that outlasts every voice that ever told you to stay small.